This is a masterclass on effective storefront design. Our goal is to gain a better understanding of successful storefront design. There's three major parts to that: the components, the customer experience, and communication. Our first part we're going to talk about today are the components. We need to first understand what are the elements that make up a storefront, what makes it effective. We want to also be talking the same language as we go through the rest of the presentation, so we'll all be talking about the same thing. Our first section of storefront is typically second story and taller. As the example shows, you can have a one-story storefront that would not have this upper facade. So it's natural the storefronts shown in this example all are typically either with a unit window, or it can be a display window to be an extension of your storefront glass. In general terms, a storefront is just your first 10 feet or so. This is all the components that make up the actual storefront. We'll get into what those different components are in the following slides. We have storefront with the storefront glass, a transom, and entry doors in different configurations. This is the area where most people's attention is directed to help you to understand what's behind that door. The cornice is a detail that's typically a crown piece, but this is just a cap that actually finishes off this upper facade of the storefront. Upper windows, like I mentioned before, are typically used as an extension of your display space. It helps to show your product, it shows messaging, and then sometimes you can have an extension of signage in this area. Our sign band becomes one of our major components that communicates the name and the feel of your storefront. As we'll see some examples later in this presentation that will show just the sizing or even font choice can be the difference in giving you the first impression or an impression at all of what this place is, if it's inviting, if it feels exclusive, and what you're actually selling. A transom window is not on every storefront. This is typically a place where you will find suite numbers or address numbers. It's just that architectural element that's part of the entry door. And display windows are one of your more important ways to see into the storefront. This is where you capture your night experiences. This is where you see what product is on display. And these sometimes can be crowded and be something that's a negative. If you're not managing this correctly, it can turn people off. It may look too crowded. It may be too confusing. This is also where people will use opportunities with light to actually help create interest and depth in the space. Entry doors. This is one of the main focal places that we want you to get to. There shouldn't ever be a question of how do I get into the storefront? How do I go in and find the things that I'm out looking for? This can be done in a number of ways. They can be tucked in. They can be pushed to the front of the street. It's always an area where you can use an accent color, and the actual glass used in this door does affect a part of your transparency that's tied to your display windows. Piers and columns are another section of these components that really tend to influence the style of architecture. These will couple with the same feel of the cornice. They can be in every storefront, and then in some they may be more modern, like this storefront in the middle on the bottom. It doesn't have columns. It's actually dedicated to having the wide plate glass. Another portion of the components that's an architectural element is the bulkhead and base of the storefront. This is a divider from the storefront glass to the sidewalk. And it's really just an architectural element that gives our proportions of the storefront a base. Awnings. These can help with shade, they can help with heat gain, but they also are meant to project out into your sidewalk. They can bring a sense of color, they can have messaging and or actually have the title or business name on them. There's many different kinds of awnings. We can have canvas awnings like this example in the middle. There are others that can be metal blades, and they do help keep you from the elements. I mentioned the heat, but also from the rain. So it gives you a little place to pause as you go in or when you're leaving. The next portion of the 3 C's is customer experience. This is all about the psychology. I put this next slide in just to show that every storefront's hope is that they have crowds like this. And if people linger, they're more apt to shop longer and spend more money. But this is just a sense of community. You can tell that this is either an event or everyone's got local ownership in the storefront. These next 10 steps are all the different layers that will contribute to effective storefront design. Each one of these steps I want to mention too, I have sample images. So we want to make sure not only do we give you the information, but to show you how that actually works. First is creating a vision. Our first two steps are vision and storytelling. They both relate to each other. And this is really about telling your story visually before you ever can speak to any of your customers. We'll go through these examples and just kind of give an explanation of why they're different. We've got on our image on the left a very modern storefront that's playing with different glass design, but it's also juxtaposition between two very traditional buildings. So it's almost like a permanent pop-up store. It doesn't look like it belongs there. So it creates a lot of attention. Then our middle two images are really using the architectural details and materials to get your attention. And then our one on the right is actually doing a combination of both. We've got a taller element that's a architectural element that is breaking that skyline, and that is to help give you a longer view. Then we have a smaller tile awning that's over the door that makes it very approachable and comfortable. Our next step is the storytelling. This is really taking your vision and creating something that makes your brand relatable and memorable. In these three images, they all do it in a different way. We have a very unassuming books and antique store where they use plants and a little bit of their product to spill out onto the sidewalk. But they also are using a lot of warm woods and familiar materials that evokes a curiosity. And then we have the Cafe Beignet storefront where they're really speaking to transparency, where they open the doors. You can see in the store, and you actually can see the counter in the back that has all the baked goods. I mean, you can almost smell the bread baking. And then you have this home store, the H&M store, where they're using a double-story storefront to not only show you all their products on the lower level, but it's also an extension to the top to actually get your attention. It's an additional display window. Our next step is to design for engagement. If we don't engage our customers in a multi-sensory experience, then we're not going to give them any kind of a memorable experience going into the storefront. All these had something in common, and this how they've engaged the sidewalk with people. I'll probably say this a few times. People attract people. There's a natural curiosity to try to understand. If you see that storefront crowded every day, you want to know what's going on. Then there's other ways you can see in these three examples of a pop of color. That choice of paint to be different than the neutral building that's usually above can create a lot of attention. And then related to the storytelling and visioning is you have to make this your concept. When I see your storefront, does it say this is what my vision and values are? In these three examples, they all do it a different way. We have a very understated postcard tees image to the left. It's storefront glass, and they have the little teapots in the window. Nice, dainty, small details, but there is some transparency. With this dark paint, they're creating all the attention goes to the lighting of this storefront. The middle two images, they're making sure that you're comfortable knowing this isn't an uptight space. They even have weird graffiti that invites you from afar. Figure out what are they independent and proud of. It's what's going on at the Highlands. And then we have the Garden Hotel and Apartment. This one's covered their full building with an undulating material that is tied back to the architectural details. And then layered on front is a lit sign. There's really no question as to what's going on here, but I can almost promise you the left and right side don't look anything like that. So they are standing out using that height and that change of material. The next thing that people don't really think about is meeting the sidewalk. This is a part of your storefront. You need to claim that sidewalk space. Make sure that your storefront engages the passersby and invites them in. The most important thing you can do is remember that the bottom 20 feet of every building matters, and especially in this case of storefront design. These three images all meet the sidewalk in a similar fashion. They have large, tall windows. There's gathering places. There's lit images that give a sense of safety, but it also gives you some place to go. The image on the right at the yard has multiple places for people to sit, and you want them to hang around like we mentioned before. That brings us to this step, to let people sit. Design your space so that they know they can hang out. It's not a transaction. It's a place that you can gather, and these gatherings foster community. And sometimes you can create where you have friends that show up all the time, and that's just your crowd. These three images show a bunch of different ways to let people sit, either if it's just visiting or if it's having a meal, or even the smaller version on the right where they're all set up to the bar looking inside. It's all about that community engagement. Our seventh step is to be transparent. Usually 3/4 of your storefront is glass, and you want to be able to tell that story through the glass and let people understand what's behind the curtain. And literally, we found an image that there is a curtain, but it's used in a sense to actually bring down the scale of that glass to a human scale. So the walkers by will not notice all the hard details of the marble around them, but then they notice that there's a much smaller gallery happening there in that jewelry store. And then we're all familiar with the Apple stores. They've taken their storefront from the floor to the cornice. And in most cases, it's a glass box. That is probably a super unique night experience when all their products are on display like it's a gallery. There's not anything that you can't see that's going on in the Apple store with it being full glass. And then this Valentino is a 4-story storefront that completely is backlit. And I'm sure that that night experience really sets it apart in this row of storefronts that it's a part of. The next is to send a loud and clear message. What is your brand message and identity? What are you trying to say? And we can do this through signage. We can do this through messaging. And sometimes the most simplistic approach is the best way. It's not too busy, but there's no mistaking this is a place to eat, just as a food business. And that may be enough for you to go see what's going on. And then you have a storefront that is a paint shop, and they've effectively used the use of color and shapes to create that curiosity. And then we have an architectural skin detail that's over the outside of this ice cream, and punching through those letters to let you just barely peek in creates a curiosity in a different way. Next is to design with proportions. This goes for the outside of your storefront, but it also goes for the inside. We have to remember, not only are we trying to create a design that is comfortable between our base and pillars and cornice and sign bands on the outside, but also that inside space. Do you have shelves that are too tall? Or your aisles too narrow? You want to make sure that checkout customer experience exchange is comfortable. So it can work in two ways. We just have to remember poor proportions equal uncomfortableness. And these two images are good examples of symmetry, and there's no question as to where the entry is, and you even have places to sit. Lastly, you have to brand it. I mean, this is your visual identity. We want to create an identity that makes, either if it's a brand that's repeatable that is in different cities, or if this is just your unique one-off store, you want to make sure that brand communicates what you're trying to sell. And these 4 cases are national brands, and they typically, in any city you go, have these elements. They may not be the exact design, but we all know Starbucks uses a mix of woods, brick, and metal, and you already know what that product is, so you're looking for it on a map before you even see the storefront. And then you have the Warby Parkers that sell sunglasses. They typically use an open storefront glass that's very transparent. Their product, being glasses, are like jewelry. They're lit and there for you to see during operation hours or after hours. Our next C in our 3 C's of effective storefront design is communication. And if we don't have our messaging, then we can't get people in the door. And that's what it's all about. We'll run through signage, glass storefront, awnings and sign bands, and then lighting. Signage is probably the most important text that's going to be on the outside of your building. You want it to be legible. It needs to reinforce your identity. It can sometimes give you some curb appeal, and it needs to get your attention. Our first image on the left is a old warehouse building where that storefront is all flat brick. So they wanted to make sure to get your attention to give you a blade sign and an awning that has extruded letters that come out from the building. It's an addition of elements that create that attention to go, this is where the entry is. In many other cases, you can use paint, and typically that's the cheaper route to get an older look, but you also can use oversized letters to get people's attention. And then you have our last two images that are the signage that's very dainty, thin stroke letters. They typically communicate a higher end experience. Our next is our storefront glass. This is our TV of our storefront. This is where you see what's going on. This is where the curiosity is piqued. And in these three examples, they use them in three totally different ways. Our image on the left is a full height glass. We've talked about how that creates attention from afar, but also it shows depth. We have the Ted Baker second image where they have all their products on the lower storefront glass, but upper is they're using this almost as a beacon, knowing people are going to get used to checking the time, but it also has this interactivity of the gears of the clock that are moving. And then we have our bakery on the right where it's visually engaging because you see the product and you know it's made fresh. Next is our awnings and sign bands. Our top row of images are awnings and the sign bands are below. With the awnings, we can add a texture and color to a building that might otherwise be in a row of very boring storefronts. It actually helps project out into your sidewalk space. So it almost helps claim that sidewalk space that's yours. There are multiple different applications for awnings, as the last two images you can see are used for more marquee and signage opportunities. And then our lower images, they help the sign bands create a certain architectural character. They can, if proportioned and balanced correctly, they really pull the whole storefront together. You want to make sure this is very visible and readable. And sometimes, less is more. Sometimes it can be taken to a negative side. The second image on the bottom, it's even hard to read that text. You see the storefront, it gets your attention. The doors are open, they're inviting you in, but it really speaks to the exclusivity. They want to make sure you know where you're going. And then you have Crown and Dolphin on the right side where they're matched with different architectural elements to bring that whole storefront together. And then lighting is one of those things that if we don't have it, people don't come see you. I mean, this is how you get your customer draw. This is where you get your visibility. It creates a mood in your place, and it can even give you depth and in a long row of storefronts, be a source of wayfinding. And one of the more important is people want to feel safe where they are. So you want to have this lit and making sure it's doing its job. The image on the top left is a good example of, hey, we're lighting our sign, but the inside lights are very turned down. And if you don't go up there and really look to see what they're selling, you may miss it, or you may go, this isn't a store for me. Our brick example on the bottom right hand is fully lit, and that coffee house is telling me it's open all hours and it's inviting you in. There's no dark spots, and it feels like a place you want to go. After those steps, I wanted to actually include just a few images that give us an idea of what bad storefronts look like. I mean, we've gone through all these images. We're talking about all the different things that make this effective storefront design. But unfortunately, most of us get the same amount of visual clutter in bad storefronts. And this example on the left, the Nike store is using their product to shape their logo, and the glass is clear enough for you to understand what's going on. There's no question. And then the bottom image, they're trying to get your attention with putting too many things in colors in the window that it's probably going to turn people off. And we have one more slide that shows these examples. I'll do this in a different way. The top level is really elegant in the way they use their materials, their signage, and the interactivity in the glass. This middle image up top, the All Saints store, those are all sewing machines that are working. So there's an interactivity that gets your curiosity. It pulls you into the store. That may be a more expensive way to do that. The more cost-effective way is this image on the right where they're using their graphics on the glass to feel like they have traveled onto the sidewalk and not even knowing what that store sells. There's an effort to get your attention that makes you want to go there. And then we've all seen the examples below in small towns and surrounding areas. They're flat. They have this middle image on the bottom has no engagement to the sidewalk. It's monotonous. There's really no curiosity to get you to go in. And this image on the bottom right, although they all have their band-aided signs above, none of those differentiate from one another enough for me to want to go in there. That concludes Effective Storefront Design. Thank you for joining.